Your 5-year plan is lying to you, not because you built it wrong, not because the numbers are off or the goals are unclear. It is lying to you because of the direction it moves in. Every financial plan you have ever made started where you are and pointed forward. Step 1 leads to step 2. This year funds next year. The person you are right now decides what the person you could become is allowed to attempt. That is how you were taught to think. That is how almost everyone thinks. And that thinking is the exact mechanism keeping millions of people exactly where they do not want to be. Here is the thing nobody says out loud. The people who build serious wealth do not plan forward. They start at the destination and engineer backward. They do not ask what they can afford to do next. They ask what a person who already has what they want would have done last. The sequence is reversed, and reversing it changes everything. Not slightly, not eventually, but in the first decision that follows the reversal. That probably sounds like a subtle distinction. It is not subtle at all. By the time you reach the final pages of what you are about to hear, you will see your old plan for what it actually was. Not ambition. A ceiling built from the inside, made entirely from your current identity's best guesses about what someone like you could reach. You are not who you think you are. More precisely, you are not only who you have been. There is a way of thinking, available to you right now, that treats your destination as the starting point. That is where this begins. Chapter 1. Your 5-year plan is working against you. There is a pattern that runs through every era of human civilization, through every culture that has ever built cities, written laws, or passed down wisdom from one generation to the next. A small number of people in each age seem to operate by a different set of rules, not different values, not different work ethic, not even different intelligence. Different direction. They move toward their destination as if they are already standing in it, and the path appears beneath their feet as they go. Meanwhile, the majority around them move forward carefully, logically, step by step, and somehow the distance never closes the way they planned. This is not a mystery of fate. It is a mechanics problem, and the moment you understand the mechanics, you cannot unsee them. You are hearing this right now, because some part of you already suspects that the way you have been planning your life is not quite working, even when the plan looks good on paper. Here is the tension that this chapter was written to name. 𝗜𝗠𝗣𝗧𝗔𝗡 was 29 years old when she sat down and built the finest 5-year financial plan she had ever seen. She had a spreadsheet with 4 tabs. She had projected her salary increases at a modest 4% per year. She had calculated how long it would take her to eliminate her student debt while simultaneously growing a savings account. That account would eventually fund a down payment on a property. She had color-coded the milestones. She had set quarterly check-ins. The plan was thorough, disciplined, and entirely realistic. She sent it to her older sister, who told her it was impressive. She felt, for about 3 days, genuinely optimistic. Then the optimism faded, not because anything went wrong, because nothing felt different. 𝗜𝗠𝗣𝗧𝗔𝗡 went to work on Monday the same way she had the Monday before. She made the same decisions, ate lunch in the same spot, thought about money the same way she always had. The plan was pinned above her desk, but she was still operating from the same place inside herself. Here is the question she never thought to ask. It is the question this entire book exists to put in front of you. What if the plan is the problem? Not the effort behind it, not the intention, not 𝗜𝗠𝗣𝗧𝗔𝗡 herself. The plan. The specific, logical, forward-moving, step-by-sequential step structure of the plan. What if the most sophisticated version of forward planning is still, at its core, pointing in the wrong direction? Call up the season you were in from 3 years back, not in terms of geography or job title, but in terms of how you understood yourself around money. Think about what felt realistic to you then. Think about the number in your head when someone asked what a good income looked like. That number was not random. It came from your environment, your comparisons, your daily evidence of what was possible for someone like you. Now think about the plan you made from that number, the ceiling you did not know you were building into every projection. That is what 𝗜𝗠𝗣𝗢𝗧𝗔𝗡 built, not a path to wealth, a very detailed map of her current self stretched forward 5 years. The open loop you need to hold right now is this. If every plan starts from who you are today, and who you are today has a specific, invisible ceiling on what feels possible, then every plan is already limited before you write the first number. Hold that question. Where exactly is the flaw? You will know before this chapter ends. There was a man named Rayford who grew up in a house where the word investment was not used except in the context of disappointment. His father had invested in a friend's business once. It failed. The lesson the household absorbed was not that most businesses require patience. The lesson was that investment was a form of risk that people like them could not afford. Rayford carried this into his adult life without ever stating it explicitly. He did not think of himself as afraid of investing. He thought of himself as realistic. When he sat down to make a financial plan at 31, the plan reflected that reality. He would save cautiously. He would avoid risk. He would build slowly. He gave himself 12 years to reach a net worth that a different version of himself, operating from a different internal starting point, might have reached in 4. The 12-year plan was not wrong because it was too conservative. It was wrong because it was a perfect photograph of the limitations he had never chosen to examine. Rayford's plan and 𝗜𝗠𝗣𝗢𝗧𝗔𝗡 plan, and if you are honest with yourself, probably your plan, share the same invisible flaw. They all begin at the same place. They begin at you, right now, with everything you currently believe about what is realistic, what is risky, what people like you do and do not do with money. And then they project that self, carefully and logically, forward into the future. This is what linear causality thinking does. It tells you that wealth is built sequentially from where you stand. You earn more, then you save more, then you invest more, then eventually, after enough sequential steps, you arrive somewhere worth arriving. The logic is clean. The math often works. And the destination is almost always far smaller than the person making the plan was actually capable of reaching. Here is why. When you plan forward from your current position, you are not just planning with your current resources. You are planning with your current identity, your current sense of what you deserve, your current picture of what kind of life belongs to you, your current assumptions about how wealth actually gets built, who builds it, and whether you are the kind of person who does. A plan is not just numbers. A plan is a self-portrait. And most people are painting themselves smaller than they are. There is a concept that will run through every chapter of this book, and you are hearing it for the first time right now. It is called starting at arrival. The idea is precise. Instead of building a plan from where you are and projecting it toward a destination, you locate yourself mentally, emotionally, and practically at the destination first. Then you work backward to discover what is required to close the distance. This is not positive thinking. This is not imagining a number and hoping it appears. It is a structural reversal in how planning works, and the difference in outcome is not incremental. It is categorical. Think of it this way. A builder who starts from an empty lot and works forward will make decisions based on available materials, current budget, local trends in housing, and the constraints of the land in front of them. The house they build will be a function of those constraints. But a builder who starts from a precise architectural vision of the finished structure works backward to every material, every measurement, every phase of construction. That builder is not constrained by the lot's current state. The lot is only the starting material. The finished vision is the actual governing force. You have been working from the lot. This book is about learning to work from the finished structure. As this book keeps moving, you will come to a point about discipline and consistency in building wealth that cuts across the standard story. When that point settles, it shifts how you spend your energy every single day. But right now, the thing to understand is the specific cost of forward sequential planning. It is not just slow. It is directionally compromised. The version of you doing the planning is not the version of you who will be living at the destination. The person who arrives at significant wealth does not think the way you think right now. They do not make daily decisions the way you make them. They do not see opportunity, time, or risk through the same frame. And if your plan does not account for that identity gap, your plan is navigating toward a destination, using the judgment of someone who has never been there. This is what 𝗜𝗠𝗣𝗧𝗘 spreadsheet could not capture. No column accounted for the version of 𝗜𝗠 who had already arrived. No row described how that version of her saw a salary negotiation, or an investment opportunity, or a quiet Tuesday morning when the choice was between comfort and the work that mattered. The spreadsheet was beautifully accurate about who 𝗜𝗠 was at 29. It had nothing to say about who she needed to become. Now close the loop. The flaw in forward planning is not that the numbers are wrong. The flaw is that the numbers are drawn from the wrong starting point. Every projection that begins at your current self encodes your current ceiling as if it were a natural law. The map is accurate. The territory it describes is simply too small. Reverse gravity pulls in the opposite direction. Instead of rising slowly against the weight of your current circumstances, you fall forward into the person you are building yourself to become, and the circumstances reorganize beneath that identity. 𝗜𝗠's plan is not beyond saving. Neither is yours, but the revision does not happen on the spreadsheet. Where does the revision begin? That is the only question that matters now, and the next chapter holds its answer. Chapter 2. Forward planning builds the wrong road. The revision begins the moment you stop trusting the plan, not the specific plan you wrote last January, not the one before that. Not the spreadsheet with color-coded cells for each savings milestone. All of them. Every plan that starts with where you are right now and points forward toward where you want to go. Every person trying to build real wealth believes this is the correct approach. They believe you assess your current resources, set a realistic target, and build a logical sequence of steps from here to there. They believe this because every book, every course, every well-meaning mentor has told them the same thing. They are wrong, not slightly misaligned. Directionally, structurally, foundationally wrong. The plan itself is the problem. Not how detailed it is, not how disciplined you are in following it, not whether your numbers are accurate. The direction is wrong. Once you understand why, you will never look at a financial plan the same way again. Here is the question this chapter is going to sit with for a while before answering. Why does a well-built forward plan almost always deliver you somewhere close to where you already are? Keep that question open. We will return to it. First, meet 𝗜𝗠𝗡. 𝗜𝗠𝗡 is 31, earns $64,000 a year as a project manager, and has been serious about money for 3 years. She reads the right books. She has an emergency fund. She contributes to her retirement account up to the employer match. 6 months ago, she sat down on a Sunday afternoon and built what she considered her best financial plan yet. She accounted for her rent, her car, her subscriptions, her groceries. She calculated how much she could realistically save each month. She projected it forward 5 years and felt something she had not felt in a long time: clarity. The plan was not reckless. It was not lazy. It was, by every conventional measure, responsible and intelligent, and it was building the wrong road. 𝗜𝗠𝗡's plan began with 𝗜𝗠𝗡. Her current salary, her current expenses, her current knowledge of what was financially possible for someone in her position. Every assumption she baked into that plan was drawn from the life she was already living. She projected forward from a self she already understood. The plan was, at its core, a detailed description of how the current 𝗜𝗠𝗡 would behave, optimized slightly for the next 5 years. At the end of those 5 years, 𝗜𝗠𝗡 would arrive. She would arrive at a more organized, slightly wealthier, better prepared version of herself. But it would still be recognizably the same self. The same income ceiling, because she planned around it rather than beyond it. The same relationship with risk, because she never stress-tested a version of herself that thought differently about it. The same social environment, because the plan never asked her to question whether the people around her were calibrated to a different financial altitude. 𝗜𝗠𝗡 built a road. It was well paved. It went exactly where it was pointed. The problem was where it was pointed. Now hold 𝗜𝗠𝗡's plan next to a different one. Not more detailed, not longer, not backed by more capital, just asked from a different direction. What does the person who already has $3 million do differently today? Not someday. Today, this Tuesday, that person wakes up and does not wonder whether they can afford to take a risk on an income stream with no guaranteed return. Their relationship with uncertainty was settled long before the money arrived. That person does not optimize their savings rate around a salary they resent. They restructured their time before they restructured their finances. That person does not choose their reading material based on what is popular in their current social circle. They stopped building their beliefs from inside their current environment a long time ago. The decisions diverge from day one. 𝗜𝗠𝗡 planned forward. She asked, "Given who I am, what can I realistically achieve?" The person thinking backward asks a different question entirely. Given who I intend to become, what does that person do right now that I am not doing? One question keeps you inside your current identity. The other places you outside it and asks you to close the gap. Bring to mind the season you were in from 3 years back. The things you worried about, the limits you assumed were fixed, the version of financial success you thought was available to you. Chances are, the ceiling you saw back then was lower than the one you see now. You did not plan your way to a higher ceiling. Something happened, a conversation, a book, a moment of seeing someone else's life up close, and the ceiling simply moved. Not because your income changed first, because your sense of what was possible changed first. That is the mechanism. That is what forward planning cannot touch. Forward planning is an optimization engine. It takes your current variables and produces the best possible output given those inputs. But if the inputs are wrong, if they are drawn from the wrong identity, the optimization only makes you more efficiently yourself, more organized, more disciplined. more productive inside the same invisible boundary. Here is what reverse gravity does differently. When you start at arrival, when you plant yourself mentally, emotionally, and practically inside the life of the person who already has what you are building toward, the inputs change first. The questions you ask change. The things you notice change. The offers you consider, the relationships you cultivate, the information you seek out, all of it bends toward a different center of gravity. The identity bridge is not a metaphor for feeling better about yourself. It is a structural tool. It changes which doors you approach because it changes which doors you believe are meant for you. A man named Daniel learned this the uncomfortable way. He was 29, working in logistics and genuinely motivated. He had built a side business selling equipment storage solutions to small construction firms, and it was growing. He hired a business coach, built a 3-year revenue plan, and got to work. Month after month he executed. He hit most of his targets. By year 2, he needed to make a significant decision. Hire a part-time operations person and scale, or stay lean and protect his margins. Daniel chose lean. He told himself it was the cautious, responsible choice. It was what his plan had trained him to do: protect the margin, minimize the unknown, stay in control of every variable. A woman named Priya in a nearly identical business at the same stage made the opposite call. She hired. She was uncomfortable doing it. But she had been asking herself a specific question for the past year. What would the version of me running a 7-figure business decide here? That version hired people before it felt safe. That version bought back time before it felt affordable. So Priya hired because the identity she was inhabiting demanded it. 18 months later, Daniel's business was stable. Priya's was 3 times the size of his. Daniel did not lack discipline. He did not lack intelligence. He lacked the right identity to make decisions from. It is not just that Priya made a better tactical call. It is that she was asking from a different place. She had already moved into the future version of herself and was looking backward at the decision. Daniel was standing at the present, looking forward, calculating risk from where he stood. One approach treats your current position as the starting line. The other treats your intended destination as home and asks what someone at home would do right now. This is the answer to the question we opened with. Why does a forward plan almost always deliver you somewhere close to where you already are? Because it was built by the person you already are. Every assumption, every risk calculation, every definition of what is realistic was drawn from your current identity. The plan is a mirror. It reflects you back to yourself with minor improvements. The error is not in the detail. Simon's plan was detailed. Daniel's plan was detailed. The error is in the direction. Forward planning from the wrong identity builds toward a more sophisticated version of where you already are. A sophisticated version of stuck is still stuck. In a later section, you will come to a point about risk. Specifically, the moment when playing it safe becomes the most dangerous financial choice you can make that cuts across the standard story. After that really registers, it shifts what you do with your next decision. But right now, this is what matters. You do not need a better plan. You need a plan built by a different person. And that person is not waiting at the end of a 5-year roadmap. That person is a choice you make before the plan begins. The road you build will go exactly where it is pointed. So where is the person holding the compass? Chapter 3. Start at arrival, then walk yourself back. The fastest way to get somewhere is to begin from there. That sentence sounds like nonsense, but it is not a riddle or a motivational trick. It is a precise description of how the people who reach significant wealth actually build their path, and it is almost exactly the opposite of what you were taught to do. Where is the person holding the compass? That question ended the last chapter for a reason. Before you can answer it honestly, you have to admit something uncomfortable. Most people are not holding the compass at all. They are following a trail that someone else blazed years ago, wearing the boots of a person they have not yet decided to become, walking toward a destination they can only see in the abstract. The direction feels forward. The motion feels like progress. But forward and progress are not the same word. Confusing them is one of the most expensive mistakes a person in their 20s or 30s can make. Here is the question this chapter opens. What does it actually mean to start at arrival? And what is standing between where you are now and the moment that concept becomes something you can use today? Hold that. The answer comes, but not yet. First, you need to understand why the conventional approach fails so completely. And why it fails quietly so that you do not notice until years have passed. You were handed a blueprint early in life. Work hard, save what you can, invest a little, and over time things compound in your favor. 30 years, 40 years. Then, somewhere near the end of the visible horizon, the wealth appears. That blueprint is not dishonest. For certain goals and certain lives it functions. But it carries a hidden assumption, one so embedded in its logic that almost nobody stops to question it. The assumption is this: you should begin where you are. Beginning where you are sounds reasonable. It sounds humble. It sounds like the kind of grounded, practical advice that separates realistic people from dreamers. But embedded inside that instruction is a posture, and that posture shapes everything that follows. When you begin where you are, you start calculating forward. You look at your current income, your current savings rate, your current options, and you project outward. You build the road from the spot where your feet are standing right now. The road goes exactly where it is pointed. Because you started the calculation from your current position, from the constraints, the gaps, the context of your present identity, the road curves toward outcomes that are just a little better than what you already have. Not because you lack ambition, because the starting point shapes the geometry. You cannot build a road to a destination you have not yet claimed as home. Go back to the season you were in from 3 years back, not in general terms specifically. What were your weekly decisions like? What did you say yes to without thinking? What did you avoid without ever consciously deciding to avoid it? Now look at where you are today. How much of your current position was planned, and how much of it was the accumulated result of those automatic choices, made by a version of you who had certain assumptions about what was possible? That is the mirror. The version of you in 3 years is being built right now, by the decisions that feel small today. So what does it look like to begin from the other end? Meet a woman named Dara. She is 29 years old, earns $50,000 a year doing administrative work for a mid-sized logistics company, and has about $6,000 in savings. On paper, she is not behind. She is stable. But stable is a word that describes a thing that is not moving. Dara has a number in her head that she has never quite let herself say out loud: $5 million. Not because she read it somewhere. Because she did the math once, late at night, and figured out that $5 million, managed conservatively, would produce enough income to remove money as a constraint from her life permanently. That is the destination. Not a fantasy, a functional calculation with a specific meaning. Now here is where most people in Dara's position go wrong. They picture the 5 million and immediately think about distance. They measure the gap. 6,000 to 5 million feels like a canyon. Standing at the edge of a canyon, the natural instinct is to look for a bridge long enough to cross it. So they search for the bridge, better job, side income, investment account. Small steps added up over time, hopefully in the right direction. 𝗓𝗓 did something different. Instead of measuring the gap, she stood at the arrival point and looked back. She asked one question: who is the person who already has $5 million? Not in lifestyle terms. Not what do they own or wear or drive. Who are they specifically as a decision maker? What do they pay attention to? What do they refuse? What do they know that someone earning $50,000 does not yet know? What relationships do they have that produce leverage? What did they treat as non-negotiable when they were at the early stages of their path? She sat with those questions for a long time. She was not daydreaming. She was building a profile. The profile was specific. Someone at her intended destination had learned to read financial statements before they had anything significant to show on their own. They had developed at least one skill that produced income independent of an hourly rate. They had stopped spending money on things that signaled status to people who would never invest in them. And they had built at least one relationship with someone who operated at a level above their current environment, not as a mentor in the formal sense, but as a standard. Someone whose presence raised what 𝗓𝗓 considered normal. Then 𝗓𝗓 asked the next question. Which of those things can I do today? Not next year. Not when she had more savings or a better job or a cleaner situation. Today. The answer was specific. She could start learning to read a basic income statement and balance sheet. She could identify one skill she already had that could be priced per project rather than per hour. She could stop paying for 2 subscriptions she was using to manage boredom rather than build anything. And she could reach out to one person in her existing network who had built something real. 4 decisions. Concrete, immediate, derived not from where she was, but from who the arrival point version of her had already needed to become. This is the reverse gravity principle in practice. Gravity, as you know it, pulls things downward from potential to the ground. Reverse gravity works differently. You place the destination above you, and you let it pull your present decisions upward toward it. The $5 million is not a dream you are walking toward. It is a fixed point you are being drawn into, one decision at a time. Each decision selected not by what feels possible today, but by what that future identity required to exist. Here is the thing nobody tells you about reverse engineering an identity. The steps do not feel bold. They feel quiet. 𝗓𝗓 learning to read a balance sheet does not look like a millionaire move. It looks like a Tuesday evening and a free resource online. But that is precisely the mechanism. The arrival point identity tells you what it needed. It needed financial literacy early. It needed pricing power over time. It needed different inputs from different people. None of those things required a large bank account to begin. They required a clear picture of the destination and the willingness to let that picture dictate today's choices, rather than waiting for today's circumstances to improve on their own. Now close the loop. What does it actually mean to start at arrival? It means that before you plan a single step forward, you define the destination with enough precision to describe its identity. Not its possessions, its identity, the decisions it makes, the things it has already learned, the relationships it already holds, the self-image that already operates as its baseline. Then you walk that identity backward, stage by stage, until you find the one decision that is available to you right now, the one the arrival point version of you already made. One decision, not a plan, not a program. One decision that is true to the identity you are constructing, made today, because the destination told you it was necessary. Every intermediate step becomes obvious when you start there. That is the line worth holding, not because the path becomes easy, but because it becomes legible. You are no longer guessing which direction is correct. You are reading the instruction that the destination itself is sending backward through time. Before long, you will come to a point about motivation, specifically about why desire alone fails to produce movement that cuts across the standard story. And when the contradiction resolves, it will permanently change how you interpret your own hesitation. For now, take the piece that is ready. You are not someone who is trying to get to the destination. You are someone who has already decided the destination is home, and who is now working backward to figure out which version of yourself needs to show up tomorrow. That is a different posture. It produces different decisions, and different decisions made consistently from the right starting point produce an entirely different road. The question is not how do I get there? The question is, who was already there and what did they need to become before they arrived? Chapter 4. The identity your destination requires right now. Something is leaving you right now, not slowly, not someday. Right now, as you listen to this sentence, something is walking out the door and you are not chasing it. It is not money exactly. It is the version of you that money was waiting for. Here is the part that compounds quietly in the background. Every morning you wake up as the person you have always been. You make the decisions that person makes, and you get the results that person gets. Again. The gap between where you are and where you intend to be is not primarily a financial gap. It is an identity gap. And an identity gap does not close by waiting. It closes by construction. The mechanism hiding behind your current results is simply this. You are still living as the person who has not arrived. That person, by definition, will keep producing outcomes that match where they came from, not where they are heading. That one question from the last chapter is still hanging in the air. Who was already there and what did they need to become before they arrived? Let that land for one more moment. The answer is not inspirational. It is structural. It is not a feeling you work yourself into. It is a set of specific, identifiable characteristics, 5 of them, and every single one is available to you before you have a single dollar more than you have right now. Here is the open loop you will carry through this chapter. A man named Darius opened a business 3 times. He failed twice, barely survived the 3rd attempt, and by his 41st birthday had built a company doing $3 million a year in revenue. Later, he said something his interviewer found strange. He said the 3rd business did not succeed because he had better information or a better market. It succeeded because by the 3rd time, he finally stopped acting like a man who was trying to build something and started acting like a man who already had. His interviewer pressed him on what that meant in practice. He paused and said, "It changed which phone calls I returned first. It changed how I spoke about the business in casual conversation. It changed which problems I let take up residence in my mind overnight." You will understand exactly what he meant before this chapter is over. Now, the 5 characteristics. Start with decisions made from a position of ownership rather than a position of hope. Someone at your target wealth level does not make most decisions from a place of wishing. They make decisions from a place of authority. What does that look like in practice today before the money is there? When you face a small financial decision, a negotiation, a contract, a price someone quotes you, the person at your destination does not accept the first number in anxious silence. They know their own worth at a level that makes pushback feel calm, not aggressive. The today decision is simpler than you think. The next time someone quotes you a number for a service, for your own labor, for a subscription you have been quietly overpaying, you pause before you accept it. Not because you are being difficult, because you are practicing the authority that lives inside the identity your destination requires. That one beat of pause, that one calm question asked on your own behalf, is not a small thing. It is a rehearsal. Second characteristic. The person at your financial destination protects their attention the way a business protects its inventory. Think about that. If a store lets its shelves empty out because anyone who walked in could take whatever they wanted, there would be nothing left to sell. Attention works the same way. At your target wealth level, people have usually built, sometimes painfully, a practice of rationing where their mental energy goes. They have learned that scattered attention produces scattered results, not dramatic results, not terrible results, scattered ones, the slightly off kind. The kind where you end up busy but not productive, tired but not accomplished. The today decision this characteristic demands costs you almost nothing in money and almost everything in discomfort. You identify one place where your attention is leaking. One, not a list. One scroll that takes 20 minutes without your noticing. One conversation that consumes the morning's best thinking on a problem that is not yours to solve. You pull that one thing back. Today. Because the person at your destination already learned this lesson, and you are not waiting to learn it anymore. Remember the season you were in from 3 years back, not in a vague, sentimental way. Specifically, what did you spend most of your focused mental energy on in any given week? And how much of that directly moved anything you actually cared about forward? You already know the answer, and you already know the version of you 3 years from now is looking back at this moment the same way you are looking back at that one. Third characteristic. Clarity about which problems deserve a solution and which deserve to be abandoned. This one is subtle, and it is where most people bleed out without knowing it. The person at your target financial level has become ruthless, not cruel, but ruthless, about the difference between a problem that must be solved and a problem that should simply be released. Not every friction is a puzzle to crack. Some frictions are signals that the direction itself is wrong. But here is the other side that gets ignored just as often. Some problems feel overwhelming not because they are large, but because you are not yet the person who can hold them with steadiness. The today decision is this. You take the problem that has been sitting in your chest the longest, the one you return to at 2 in the morning, and you ask one question you have probably never directly asked. Is this a problem I need to solve, or is this a signal I need to hear? Those are two completely different things. And the answer will change what you do next in a way that no amount of effort aimed at solving it ever could. Fourth characteristic. Comfort with being misread by people at a different level. This is the one that stops more people than almost anything else. You move toward a level of wealth and competence and self-possession that the people around you have not yet moved toward, and something uncomfortable happens. They misread you. They call it arrogance. They call it disconnection. They get quiet or strange when you stop complaining alongside them about things you used to complain about together. This discomfort is not a sign that something is wrong. It is a sign that the identity bridge is holding weight. The person at your destination has already crossed this particular stretch. They sat with the discomfort of being temporarily misunderstood by people they genuinely cared about, and they let the misreading pass without retreating. The today decision here is not dramatic. It does not require any announcement. The next time you feel the pull to shrink back into a previous version of yourself because someone in your immediate circle looks at you sideways, you notice the pull. You name it silently, and you do not follow it. Fifth characteristic. Long horizon thinking applied to ordinary days. The person at your target level does not only think in quarters or years when they sit down for formal planning. They carry a long horizon lens into the fabric of ordinary decisions. When they consider whether to spend 2 hours on something, they are running a quiet calculation in the background. Is this the kind of 2 hours that compounds, or the kind that simply passes? Not obsessively, not anxiously, just as a background hum of orientation. The today decision is to apply that lens to one thing you have been treating as neutral, something you assumed was neither here nor there. Because at your destination, very few things are neutral. Most things are either compounding in the direction you want, or compounding in a direction you did not choose. Now close the loop on Darius. When he said his third business succeeded because he started acting like a man who already had something rather than a man trying to build something, this is exactly what he meant. He started returning calls from the identity of the owner. He was becoming rather than the founder who was still uncertain. He stopped softening his language about what the company was and what it was not. He walked into rooms with the quiet assumption of someone who belonged there. And when he said it changed which problems he let live in his mind overnight, what he meant was this. He had decided which version of himself was making the decisions, not the version shaped by fear of failure, the version shaped by the clarity of arrival. That is the whole thing. That is the mechanic hiding underneath every piece of advice about wealth you have ever heard and dismissed because it felt too simple or too soft. The identity is not the reward. This is the revelation this whole chapter has been building toward, the one thing linear thinking will never show you. The identity your destination requires is not a reward for arriving. It is the prerequisite that makes arrival possible at all. Down the line in this book, you will come to a point about how long identity change actually takes that cuts across the standard story. Once that becomes real to you, it shifts how you measure your own progress from this point forward. For now, there is one question left to carry forward. If you already knew which version of yourself made arrival inevitable, what would be the very first decision that version of you would make differently tomorrow morning before anyone else is watching? Chapter 5. Why Timelines Collapse When Identity Leads. Deciding who you are before you decide what to do is the fastest path to money most people will ever ignore. That sounds backwards. It probably sounds like soft philosophy, the kind someone offers when they cannot explain real financial results. But it is not philosophy. It is a mechanical observation about how decisions compound. Once you see the mechanism clearly, you will understand why two people can start from the same bank balance, the same city, the same Tuesday morning, and arrive at completely different financial realities within 24 months. Not because one worked harder, because one of them was making every decision from a different address inside their own mind. That question at the end of the last chapter, what would the version of you who already arrived do differently tomorrow morning before anyone is watching? That is the entry point. This chapter is the machinery behind the answer. Here is what nobody tells you about timelines. They do not compress because of effort. They compress because of coherence. A decision made from your current identity points in one direction. A decision made from your destination identity points in another. Those two directions look almost identical on day 1. By month 6, they are miles apart. By month 24, you cannot even see one from the other. Look back at your actual circumstances from 3 years back. Not emotionally, not philosophically, think practically. What were you saying yes to? What were you saying no to? Were those decisions coming from who you were, or from who you intended to become? For most people, the honest answer is the same. Every decision in those 3 years came from the person they already were. They planned forward from a self they had already outgrown. They drew a road to a destination they had not yet claimed as home. That is the cost, not wasted time in abstract terms. The cost is specific. Every decision inside those 3 years carried the weight of an old identity into new territory. It slowed everything down the way a boat drags anchor and still expects to move at full speed. Marcus ran a landscaping crew in his late 20s. Good worker, reliable. He had a business plan that outlined 5 years of growth, more clients, a second truck, 2 extra workers, a deposit saved, maybe a small commercial property by year 5. The plan was logical. The plan was careful. The plan was built entirely on who Marcus was in the moment he wrote it. He priced jobs the way a worker prices jobs, careful not to ask too much, worried the client would walk. He hired the way someone scared of overhead hires, waiting until the work was already there before adding anyone. He spent money the way someone who expects to be broke next spring spends money, hoarding margin instead of deploying it. Every decision was sound. Every decision was coherent. Coherent with the wrong identity. 3 years in, Marcus had a slightly bigger version of what he started with. 2 trucks instead of 1. 4 clients instead of 2. Nothing wrong with that. But the commercial property was still a dream on a plan he updated every January. Then something interrupted the sequence. His brother-in-law, 𝗜𝗠𝗣𝗧𝗘, had started a similar outdoor services business the same year. Different city, same resources, same industry. But 𝗜𝗠𝗣𝗧𝗘 had done something unusual at the start. He spent 2 weeks before launching doing nothing but studying the decisions made by people who already ran 7-figure operations in his industry. Not studying their tactics, studying how they thought about a proposal, how they responded when a client pushed back on price, what they said no to. He was not copying their actions. He was borrowing their identity long enough to install it as his own starting point. 𝗜𝗠𝗣𝗧𝗘 priced like someone who expected to be chosen. He hired before the work fully arrived, because he had already decided the work was coming. He reinvested margins because the version of himself at the destination would never hoard cash in a checking account while an opportunity sat waiting. Same 2 years. Completely different results. Not because 𝗜𝗠𝗣𝗧𝗘 worked harder than Marcus. Because 𝗜𝗠𝗣𝗧𝗔𝗡𝗧 decisions compounded from a different starting identity, and compounding does not care about effort. It only cares about the direction of each input. That is the mechanism. That is what this chapter is about. Here is the model in plain terms. Imagine 2 columns of 24 months. In the first column, every decision begins with the question, what makes sense given where I am right now? In the second column, every decision begins with a different question. What would I do here if I already knew I was going to arrive? Same 24 months, same number of decisions, but the decisions in the second column carry something the first column's decisions do not. They carry identity gravity from the destination. Because each decision influences the next one. Because the person you are on day 30 is shaped by the decisions you made on days 1 through 29. By month 6, the second column is not just ahead. It is operating from a completely different platform. This is what reverse gravity means in practice. The destination pulls the decisions backward through time. You are not pushing toward wealth from behind it. You are allowing wealth, as an identity that already exists in your future, to exert gravitational pull on every choice you make today. The practical difference is surgical. Someone operating from their current identity asks, "Can I afford this?" Someone operating from their destination identity asks, "Does this belong in the life I have already claimed?" The first question is a scarcity filter. The second is a coherence filter. Coherence filters let through a completely different set of decisions. Better clients, faster pricing, cleaner negotiations, earlier hires, smarter partnerships. Every door opens a few months sooner because you arrived at it from a different posture. What does a scarcity filter cost you across 24 months? Here is the honest number. It costs you the compounding of every decision you made correctly but slightly too late, too small, or too cautiously. It is not one big missed moment. It is the steady drag of 100 small decisions that were 90% right, but calibrated to someone who had not yet arrived. Now ask yourself this. If every decision you make today recalibrates your next decision, what happens to someone who has been making identity-aligned decisions for 8 months straight? They are not just ahead. They are operating from a different altitude. The decisions available to them at month 8 are different decisions than what they would have accessed from a forward-planned timeline. Different rooms open. Different people appear. Different risks become visible that were invisible from the lower elevation. This is not metaphor. This is literally how relationships, deals, and opportunities work. They materialize in proportion to the clarity and consistency of the signal you are already broadcasting. There is a question that has been sitting in the background of this chapter since the second paragraph. You noticed it even if you did not name it. The question is this: if identity-first decision-making is so clearly faster, why does almost everyone default to forward planning from their current self? The answer is discomfort disguised as practicality. Planning from your current identity feels responsible. It feels measured. It feels like you are respecting reality. And you are just respecting the wrong reality. You are treating your current self as a fixed fact when it is actually just the most recent version of a person who has been changing since the day you were born. Forward planning from your current identity is not respect for reality. It is a habit dressed up as humility. The destination identity is also real. It exists as a coherent, achievable configuration of decisions and habits and reflexes. The only question is whether you access it now and let it pull your decisions into alignment from the beginning, or whether you wait to become it gradually, through accumulation, the slow way, the way that takes a decade to cover ground some people cover in 2 years. A little later, we turn toward an argument about discipline and willpower that cuts across the standard story. When that idea snaps into focus, it shifts how you act when the work gets hard and the identity gap feels widest. For now, the mechanism is clear. Identity set at the destination level front-loads the entire behavioral sequence. The decisions compound from a higher starting position. The gaps close faster because you are not dragging the anchor of a self who has not yet decided to arrive. Marcus eventually figured this out. It took him longer than Dion, not because he was less capable, but because the moment of clarity came later. When it came, it did not arrive as a strategy. It arrived as a question he had not let himself ask honestly before. He asked, "What would I do in this meeting if I already knew I was the kind of operator who owns commercial property by 35? The question felt uncomfortable. It felt presumptuous. He asked it anyway. The answer reshaped the next hour, which reshaped the next week, which reshaped the next quarter in a way that no updated 5-year plan had ever managed to do. The answer was always there. The question was the key. You are not behind. You are simply making decisions from an address you have not yet updated. The question that will carry forward into the next chapter is not whether you can hold a destination identity. You can. The real question is what you do on the day the identity feels false. when the decisions you are supposed to make from arrival feel like a costume instead of a name, and every comfortable old habit pulls you back toward the self who did not yet know the way home. Chapter 6. The bridge nobody tells you you're already on. Something is leaking away from you right now, and it is not dramatic enough to feel like an emergency. It is quieter than that. Every week you operate from your current identity, the one priced at what you have already proven, the one that waits for evidence before it acts, is a week your future self cannot use. That is not motivational language. That is arithmetic. The clients you are not attracting at this level will not wait. The prices you are not charging are compounding downward into a reputation that becomes harder to escape with each passing month. And the invisible mechanism causing all of it is not laziness or fear or even lack of skill. It is sequence. You have the sequence backwards. You are waiting for arrival before you act like someone who has arrived. This chapter exists to show you exactly what it costs to keep doing that, and precisely what happens when you stop. That question from the previous chapter deserves a direct answer. What do you do on the day the identity feels like a costume? What happens when the version of you that is supposed to be living from arrival suddenly feels like an actor who forgot their lines, and every old habit is standing in the wings holding the familiar script you used to live by? You do not panic. You do not retreat. You recognize exactly where you are. You are on the bridge. Most people never get this explained to them. They reach a point in their own growth where the new identity feels real some days and completely hollow on others. They get a glimpse of who they are becoming, and then life asks them a hard question, a bill, a rejection, a moment of comparison, and the glimpse goes dark. They interpret that darkness as evidence that the new identity was never real, so they walk back. They lower their prices. They soften their standards. They return to the comfortable coordinates of who they used to be, and they call it being realistic. But that darkness is not a sign you were wrong. That darkness is the bridge. Here is the open question this chapter is going to hold for you, and do not reach for the answer yet. Why does the discomfort of growth almost always arrive at the exact moment you are closest to crossing over? Sit with that for now. The answer is coming. But you need to feel the full shape of the problem before the answer will mean anything to you. Consider a woman named 𝗡𝗢𝗧𝗔𝗡. She ran a small consulting practice helping mid-size retail companies untangle their inventory management, a specific, technical, genuinely valuable skill she had built over 9 years working for other people. When she left to work for herself, she priced her services at what she felt she could justify, $400 a day. She felt this was honest. She had done the math on what clients in her market could afford, and she had priced herself just below the threshold where anyone could object. The work was steady. The clients were not. They called at odd hours. They questioned her recommendations. They delayed payments by 30 and 40 days, then apologized with a warmth that made it feel rude to push back. They treated her expertise with the casual respect people extend to a good handyman, grateful, but not particularly reverent. 𝗡𝗢𝗧𝗔𝗡 ground through it for 2 years, concluding that this was simply what consulting was. Then one evening she sat across from another consultant at an industry dinner, someone with a less impressive resume than her own, narrower experience, younger by almost a decade. And this person mentioned, without any particular emphasis, that she had just closed a project at $4,000 a day. 𝗡𝗢𝗧𝗔𝗡 went home and did not sleep. Within 2 weeks she had rewritten every proposal template she owned. She raised her day rate by 600%. She redesigned her onboarding process. She stopped accepting calls that were not scheduled in advance. She updated the language on her website to reflect what a senior strategist charges, not what a cautious freelancer permits herself to ask for. And for 3 weeks, almost nothing happened. Her inbox stayed quiet. She doubted everything. The old coordinates pulled at her with a specific and familiar gravity. She could feel the logic of retreat forming in the back of her mind, the reasonable-sounding story about market conditions and client budgets, and being patient with the process. She did not retreat. 60 days after the rate change, Priya was working with 2 clients who had found her through a referral. Both had paid her new rate without negotiation. One had called her before she had even finished her first proposal. And neither of them called at odd hours, questioned her process, or delayed a single payment. The work was the same. Priya was the same. The only thing that had changed was the signal her pricing sent about which identity she was operating from. Now let that land before you reach for the explanation. What happened to Priya was not magic. It was not luck. It was a mechanism that most people never get taught in language they can actually use. When she raised her prices, she was not simply charging more money. She was issuing a claim about who she was, a claim that preceded any new evidence of deserving it. She acted from a destination identity before the destination had confirmed her. And the discomfort of those 3 quiet weeks, that was the bridge. She was crossing it. She did not know that is what it was called. She just refused to walk back. The identity bridge is the stretch of ground between who you have been and who you are in the process of becoming. It feels unstable not because it is, but because you are carrying the weight of 2 identities at once. The old one has evidence behind it. Every client who ever paid you the lower rate, every person who ever accepted the cautious version of your offer, all of that confirms who you used to be. The new identity has no evidence yet. It only has a claim, and claims feel thinner than evidence. That thinness is what people confuse with falsehood. Return to your actual circumstances from 3 years back. Not the broad strokes, but the specific texture of your daily decisions. What were you charging, or what were you accepting, or what ceiling were you working beneath without ever putting a name on it? In those 3 years, something has shifted. Some belief has moved. Some proof has accumulated. And you now operate from a slightly different place. You did not feel yourself cross that line. You crossed it before you noticed. The bridge only becomes visible in retrospect because you kept walking when it felt unstable, and then one day the ground was simply different beneath your feet. That is always how it works. The mechanism runs in reverse of everything linear causality thinking promises you. The common logic says, earn the credentials, gather the proof, then act like someone who has it. Credential first, claim second. Evidence first, identity second. Work hard enough at the lower rate, and eventually the market will promote you to the higher one. But the market does not promote you. The market reflects you. Your pricing, your positioning, the clients you attract, the rooms you enter, the offers you accept or decline, these are not outcomes of your identity. They are inputs. They are signals you send outward that tell the world which version of you has shown up today. And the world, with remarkable consistency, responds to the signal. This is not delusion. This is the correct sequence. Delusion would be claiming the destination without doing the work. That is not what the bridge demands. The bridge demands that you do the work from the vantage point of someone who already knows they are going to arrive. There is a difference between a person climbing a mountain hoping it goes well and a person climbing the same mountain knowing they have already been to the top and are simply going back. They are carrying the same weight. The terrain is identical, but one of them moves with a certainty that changes every decision, which path they choose, how they respond when the weather turns, whether they camp or keep going. You are the second climber. You just have not been told that yet. Now, here is the answer to the question this chapter asked you to hold. Why does discomfort arrive most intensely at the moment you are closest to crossing over? Because the bridge has a midpoint. At the midpoint, both shores feel equally far. You cannot clearly see where you came from, and you cannot clearly see where you are going. The old identity pulls at you with nostalgia, while the new one offers nothing but the thin promise of arrival. That midpoint is where most people turn around, not because they lack courage, because they lack a map that tells them where they are standing. You are standing at the midpoint, or you have been recently, or you will be soon. And now you have the map. The bridge is not a sign that you were wrong to step onto it. The bridge is the mechanism. It is the exact structure through which a new identity is made real. You do not think your way across it. You do not wait for evidence and then cross it. You act from the destination side before you are standing there. And the acting is what builds the bridge beneath your feet as you walk. Further on, we turn toward an argument about the role of discomfort in building wealth. Once that lands, it reshapes how you respond to the hardest moments of your own growth that cuts across the standard story. But for now, hold this. Priya did not feel ready. She raised her rates anyway. The 3 weeks of quiet were not a verdict. They were the bridge. And on the other side, the clients who found her were not better because she had gotten better. They were better because she had finally told the truth about where she was going. The bridge is not the obstacle. The bridge is the proof that you have already decided to arrive. Chapter 7. Reverse gravity pulls you up instead of down. Deciding who you are before you earn the right to be that person is not arrogance. It sounds like delusion, and you are right to hesitate. But the people who built wealth fastest were not the ones who waited for evidence before claiming an identity. They were the ones who claimed the identity and then watched the evidence arrive to meet them. That contradiction is worth sitting with. Inside it lives the entire mechanics of what this chapter is about to explain. There is a force available to you right now. A kind of pull that originates not from discipline or hustle or superior strategy, but from where you have already decided you are going. Most people have never felt it because they have never made the decision clearly enough to activate it. By the end of this chapter, you will understand exactly what that force is, and more importantly, you will know why the moment you claim a destination with full conviction, that destination begins pulling you toward it. The bridge is not the obstacle. The bridge is the proof that you have already decided to arrive. Read that again in your mind, because the next question is the one most people never ask. If the bridge is already proof of arrival, then what happens to every decision you make while you are still standing on it? Here is the thing about gravity. You learned in school that it pulls things down. An object falls because the earth exerts a force on it, dragging it toward the center of mass. Most people treat their financial lives the same way. They assume the weight of where they are right now is what determines the direction they move. They look at their bank account, their salary, the gap between what they have and what they want, and they feel that downward drag. They call it reality. They call it being responsible. They call it knowing your place. But there is another kind of gravity, and it pulls upward. Think about a magnet. A magnet does not wait for the metal to approach before exerting influence. The field extends outward in every direction, and any piece of iron that comes within range begins to orient itself toward the source. It does not decide to move. It does not summon willpower. The field does the work. What you are building when you construct a destination identity, when you claim the future self not as a wish but as a settled fact, is not a plan. It is a field, and every decision you face while inside that field gets oriented by it, the way iron orients toward a magnet. This is what reverse gravity means. Here is what it does not mean. It does not mean pretending you have money you do not have. It does not mean performing success for other people or spending on signals before you have built the foundation. That is not claiming a destination identity. That is borrowing someone else's costume. Reverse gravity is an internal phenomenon. It operates in the way you frame choices, the standards you hold for your own time, the things you decline before anyone else even makes the offer. It is quieter than confidence and more durable than motivation. Let us bring this into the concrete. Her name was 𝗡𝗢𝗧𝗘. She had just left a salaried product role to start a software company with 2 other people and a shared Google Drive. The company had no revenue. It had a product that was barely functional and a deck that was 15 slides long. By every conventional measure, 𝗡𝗢𝗧𝗘 was at the beginning. But 𝗡𝗢𝗧𝗘 had made a decision before the company existed. A decision she never announced out loud to investors or partners. Her company would be acquired within 6 years by a firm large enough to accelerate the product into new markets. She had decided on the exit before she had decided on the launch. What happened next was not mystical. It was mechanical. From the first week, 𝗡𝗢𝗧𝗘 built documentation habits that were unusual for a company that size. She insisted on clean data structures even when messy ones would have worked fine in the short term. When her co-founders wanted to build a feature quickly and skip the architectural planning, she pushed back. Not because she was rigid, but because she was already thinking about the due diligence process that would happen years later. When an early investor suggested they chase a market segment that would have inflated their user numbers but attracted low-quality engagement, 𝗡𝗢𝗧𝗘 declined. She said they needed retention metrics that told a clear story. Her co-founders thought she was being precious. She was not being precious. She was being acquired. 𝗡𝗢𝗧𝗘 was making acquisition-ready decisions from month 1 because she had claimed the exit as her present identity, not her future hope. Her destination was already home. Every decision inside that company got pulled upward toward the standards of that exit. Not because she was disciplined enough to force herself toward them every single morning, but because the field was active. The gravity was reverse. The future was doing the pulling. Here is the open loop this chapter needs you to hold for a moment. If claiming a destination identity generates this kind of gravitational pull, then why do so few people do it? Why do capable, intelligent, driven people spend years making decisions from the ground level instead of the arrival point? The answer is coming. Hold the question. Picture your actual circumstances from 3 years back. Not just financially. Think about the version of you who existed at that exact moment. Think about the decisions that version of you made every day. The choices about time, about money, about who you spent hours with, and who you let drain those hours without return. Now ask yourself one honest question. Were those decisions made from where you were or from where you had decided to arrive? Most people, if they are honest, will say the first one. And if you trace the line from those decisions to where you are right now, you will see the path that ground-level gravity builds. It is not catastrophic. It is just slower than it had to be. That is the cost, not failure, slowness. And slowness is expensive in a way that does not show up on any statement you can see. The compound interest of a raised decision standard, applied daily over 6 years, is not a small number. It is the number that explains why some people seem to make a decade of progress in 4 years, while others make 4 years of progress in a decade. The mechanism is not talent. It is the height from which decisions are being made. Now here is why most people never activate this. Linear causality thinking, the belief that you must earn your way into an identity before you can operate from it, is one of the most deeply embedded ideas in the way your culture raised you. You were taught that credentials come before authority, that savings come before investment knowledge, that results come before confidence, and there is a version of that sequence that is true and necessary. You should not perform expertise you do not have. You should not fake results you have not produced. But the sequence breaks down at the level of identity, because identity is not a credential. It is an operating system, and you can install a different operating system before you have the hardware to match it, because the operating system is what tells the hardware what to build toward. This is why the 5-year plan on its own fails almost everyone who makes one. A plan is a road, but a road built from where you are, pointing outward toward a destination you have not yet claimed as home, is still a road that belongs to someone standing at the beginning. The person at the beginning makes beginning-level decisions, even with a plan in hand, because the identity has not changed. The gravity is still pointing down. The identity bridge changes this. When you stand in the destination identity first, the bridge you build does not look like a plan. It looks like memory. You are not plotting how to get somewhere. You are remembering the steps from a place you have already arrived. And remembered steps have a different quality than planned steps. They feel inevitable. They feel like sequence rather than speculation. The decisions they produce are cleaner, higher standard, and less susceptible to the distortion of short-term fear. Here is the answer to the question you have been holding. The reason capable people rarely claim destination identities is not because they lack imagination. It is because claiming an identity before you can prove it requires you to tolerate a specific kind of discomfort. The discomfort of operating at a standard that your current circumstances do not yet confirm. Every day for a while, you will make a higher-level decision and have no external evidence that it was right. 𝗓𝗢𝗧𝗔𝗡 documented her code base meticulously for months before a single investor asked to review it. The field was active, but the metal had not arrived yet. That gap between activating the field and watching the metal arrive is where most people retreat. They mistake the lag for evidence that it is not working. It is not evidence of failure. It is the mechanics of how the field works. Reverse gravity is not instant, but it is constant, and constant beats intense every time over a long enough window. The most important thing you can do today is not set a goal. Goals operate at the level of outcome. What you need is a decision at the level of identity, a clear, non-negotiable internal claim about the person you already are, stated in the present tense, held without public announcement or external permission. 𝗓𝗢𝗧𝗔𝗡 never told her co-founders about the exit she had decided on. The field does not require witnesses. It only requires conviction. When you make that claim not as aspiration but as settled fact, something quiet begins to happen. The decisions available to you on any given day do not change, but the decisions you actually make do. And over months and years, the gap between who you were and who you claim to be closes. Not because you forced it closed with effort, but because the gravity was always pulling you there. Soon, we turn toward an argument about the right moment to make a large financial commitment that cuts across the standard story. When that becomes clear, it reshapes how you decide to act on almost every meaningful opportunity from that point forward. But for now, sit with this. The field is either active or it is not. And only one person can turn it on. What identity have you been waiting for permission to claim? Chapter 8. the fastest decision-making framework ever built. Right now, today, you are losing money you have not earned yet, not in some abstract future sense. Right now, in the gap between who you are acting like and who you need to become, something is draining out. Every decision you make from the wrong identity costs you, not just the decision itself, the compounding consequence of it, the job you stay in because leaving feels premature, the investment you skip because it feels like something a richer version of you would do, the negotiation you walk away from because you are not sure you deserve the number you wanted to name. Each of those moments is not neutral. Each one is a door you pass without opening. And behind that door is not just this month's difference. It is the year that follows this month. And the year that follows that. The loss is quiet. It does not announce itself. But it is real, and it is daily, and somewhere inside you, you already know the mechanism causing it. You have been making decisions as who you are right now instead of who you have already decided to become. That question the last chapter left you holding. What identity have you been waiting for permission to claim? That question was not rhetorical. It was structural. Because here is what no one ever tells you about decision-making. Speed and accuracy both come from the same source. Not more information, not more time, not a better spreadsheet or a longer pros and cons list. They come from identity clarity. This chapter is going to give you the most precise decision-making tool you have ever used. Let's start with a question that might feel strange at first. Have you ever noticed how some decisions that should feel hard simply don't for certain people? Not because those people are smarter, not because they have better options, but because they already know what kind of person they are. Watch a serious athlete decide whether to skip a morning workout. Watch a committed parent decide whether to take a call during dinner. The decision is essentially made before the moment arrives. The identity has already done the choosing. That is not discipline in the way most people imagine discipline. That is arrival applied backward, living from the destination outward. This is the engine beneath everything in this book. Reverse gravity. You stop being pulled forward by hope and start being anchored backward by identity. You stop asking what should I do next and start asking what would someone who already arrived here do right now. There is a question you need to live inside for the rest of this book. Actually, 3 of them. 3 questions that form a filter. You run every significant financial decision through this filter before you act. Not every small decision. Don't overcomplicate the ordinary. But every choice that carries real weight. Where your money goes, how your time is spent, what you agree to, what you walk away from. Here is the filter. First, does this choice come from where I am, or does it come from where I intend to be? Second, would the person who already has what I want make this same decision? Third, what does this choice signal to the world and to myself about who I believe I am? 3 questions. You can run them in 60 seconds. Together they function as what I want you to think of as the identity bridge, the structure that connects your current financial position to the destination you have already claimed as home. Every time you cross that bridge with a decision, you reinforce it. Every time you make a choice from your old position, you weaken it. The bridge is built one decision at a time. Now here is the open question I want to plant before we go further. You may be thinking this sounds clean in theory but breaks down when the stakes are real, when the numbers are large, when the pressure is high, when the emotion is fully in the room. Hold that concern. We are going to meet it directly before this chapter ends. But first, let's build the muscle through specifics. The framework only earns your trust once you have seen it work inside real situations. Revisit your actual circumstances from 3 years back. Not in general terms, specifically. The account balance, the job or situation, the version of yourself who was making daily decisions. Now ask yourself honestly, how many of those decisions were made from the place you wanted to arrive, and how many were made from the place you were standing? Most people 3 years back were making almost every choice from current position, from fear of the gap, from insufficient belief in the destination, from the invisible weight of linear thinking. This is the mirror moment, not to create regret, but to make the cost of the old method visible, because visible costs can be changed. Invisible ones cannot. Let us walk through 5 decisions using the filter, slowly and carefully, because this is where the framework earns its place. First decision. You are offered a freelance project that pays fairly but runs for 6 months and locks your schedule. You need the income, but something feels off. Old method. You weigh the money against the inconvenience and probably take it because money is money. Filter method. You ask, does this come from where I am or where I intend to be? The person who already arrived at a 6-figure independent practice does not take 6-month low-margin contracts that fill the calendar and prevent better work from entering. They say no, politely but firmly, and they use that time to build the thing they said they were building. The filter answer is no. And the no does not feel like deprivation. It feels like accuracy. Second decision. You are considering moving your savings into an investment account rather than leaving it in a low-interest account. You have been putting this off for 11 months. Old method. You tell yourself you will do it when you understand more, when you feel more ready, when the market feels more predictable. Filter method. You ask, would the person who already has what I want still be waiting? No, that person made this move years ago. They understand that waiting for certainty is itself a financial choice, and it is rarely the profitable one. The filter answer is to move today, not when you feel ready. Today. Third decision. Someone offers you a partnership in a business that seems lucrative. You have a feeling they value your skills more than you value the structure of the deal. The equity split does not reflect the contribution you are being asked to make. Old method. You feel grateful to be asked. You minimize your concern about the terms, and you sign because opportunities feel scarce. Filter method. You ask what the version of you who already operates at this level would do. That version has been in 3 or 4 of these conversations. That version knows scarcity is a feeling, not a fact. That version asks for better terms, not aggressively, clearly. The filter answer is to negotiate, and if the other party walks, the filter tells you what kind of partner they would have been. Fourth decision. You are deciding whether to spend $400 on a course that directly addresses a skill gap slowing your income. Old method. You calculate $400 against this month's pressure and feel the pinch. You decide you will buy it later when things loosen up. Filter method. Question 2. Would the person who already arrived at your intended destination hesitate to spend $400 on a directly relevant skill? That person spends that amount on a dinner and does not feel it. But even before they had the money easily, they understood that the skill was the bridge and the $400 was the toll. The filter answer is to buy the course and stop pretending that waiting for a better month is a strategy. Fifth decision. Someone asks you to describe what you do professionally, and you have a choice between the modest, careful version of your answer and the fully true version. Old method. You shrink slightly because the full version feels like a claim you have not quite earned. Filter method. Question 3. What does this choice signal to the world and to yourself about who you believe you are? Every time you give the smaller answer, you practice believing the smaller thing. Every time you give the full, true answer, you practice the identity you are building. The filter answer is to give the full answer, not exaggeration, the full truth, and to hold it without apology. 5 decisions. 5 times the filter cut through the noise and landed on something clean. That is the framework in motion. That is the identity bridge being crossed in real time. Now we return to the concern I asked you to hold. Does this break under real pressure? When the stakes are high, when emotion floods the decision, when the numbers actually frighten you, does the filter still hold? Here is the truth. Under real pressure, you will not feel like using the filter. The old linear thinking surges back because it is older and louder and it has been practiced far longer. This is not a failure of the framework. It is the cost of the transition. The filter has to be practiced when the stakes are low, so that it is already a reflex when the stakes are high. You run it on the small decisions until it is automatic. The freelance project, the bank account, the course. You practice on those until the 3 questions rise without effort. And then when something significant arrives, a real estate decision, a business investment, a major career move, the identity bridge is already standing. You do not have to build it under pressure. You have been building it all along, one daily choice at a time. Later on, we turn toward an argument about the relationship between patience and wealth building that cuts across the standard story. After that clicks, it reshapes how quickly you act on the things you already know are right. Every decision becomes faster and more accurate when you run it through the filter of who you have already decided to be, not who you are working toward, not who you hope to become someday, who you have claimed, right now, today. The decision in front of you right now, what would the person who already arrived here do? Chapter 9. Why the rich make decisions you can't currently comprehend. Wealthy people are not smarter than you. They are simply solving a different problem. That sounds like comfort talk. It is not. It is one of the most practically useful distinctions you will ever hear. The moment you understand that the problem they are solving is structurally different from the one you are solving, you stop misreading their decisions as genius and start reading them as instructions. Here is the question that will anchor this entire chapter. Why do the same financial moves that look reckless, arrogant, or flat-out stupid from where you stand look completely obvious to the person making them? That question matters more than almost anything else in this book. Until you can answer it, you will keep watching wealthy decisions from the outside and learning the wrong lessons. You will keep making the safe, sensible, forward-looking choice that quietly guarantees you stay exactly where you are. That question has one answer. Hold it for now. Let it sit unanswered while we build toward it honestly. Call up your actual circumstances from 3 years back, not in some abstract sense specifically. The account balance, the decisions you were proud of, the ones you were afraid to make. What did you believe was responsible? What did you believe was reckless? And how many of the things you thought were reckless then have you since discovered were just unfamiliar? That gap between reckless and unfamiliar is exactly where this chapter lives. There is a woman named 𝗓𝗓 who ran a small graphic design studio out of a rented co-working space in a mid-sized city. She had 11 steady clients. Not famous ones, not large corporations, local businesses, a few regional nonprofits, a restaurant group. Solid work, respectable income. She charged $300 for a logo package. That price had felt fair when she started, and she kept it because it kept the clients coming. Then 𝗓𝗓 raised her prices, not by 10%, not by 25%. She raised her starting package to $1,800 overnight. No new credentials. No new portfolio additions. No new software. Same work. nearly 6 times the price. Every person around her said it was a mistake. Her friend who ran a competing studio said she would lose everyone. Her accountant ran the numbers on client retention and got pale. Even her most loyal client called to ask if she was doing all right. She lost 8 of her 11 clients in the first month, and within 4 months, the 3 who stayed had each doubled their project volume with her. 2 new clients found her companies who had dismissed her previously because her prices had signaled she was a hobbyist. Her revenue in month 5 was higher than any month in her previous 3 years. Her stress was lower. Her work was better. She had more time. What 𝗓𝗓𝗓𝗓 did not announce to anyone was the identity she had already decided to inhabit. She was not thinking about how to get from $300 to $1,800. She was already living as someone who charged $1,800, and she had removed the price that contradicted that identity. From her current position at the time, it looked like a gamble. From her destination identity, it was maintenance. Now notice what you almost did right there. You almost explained her success by saying she got lucky, or that her market was special, or that she had some advantage that made it work. That explanation is the protective instinct of someone who is still solving the old problem. 𝗓𝗓𝗓𝗓 was not lucky. She was legible. She became readable to the clients she was built for because she had stopped speaking the language of someone those clients would never hire. This is the first example, and it almost always stops people raising prices when revenue needs to grow. From a forward planning position, the math screams against it. You need more money, so you need more clients, so you keep prices accessible to attract more people. Every step of that logic is reasonable. Every step of that logic is backward. The second example is harder to swallow. A man named Jerome had spent 9 years building a small but real investment portfolio. Careful decisions, diversified, safe. He watched it grow slowly, steadily, and he felt proud of the discipline it represented. Then he found a business opportunity that required him to liquidate a significant portion of that portfolio, about 60%, to fund the initial phase. No guaranteed return. High execution risk, a real possibility of losing most of it. His financial advisor told him not to do it. His brother told him he was throwing away 9 years of work. A close friend who worked in finance laid out a detailed chart of why the expected value calculation did not support the move. Jerome did it anyway. From the forward planning position, this looks like exactly the kind of impulsive, emotion-driven decision that keeps people from building real wealth. You do not blow up a decade of disciplined saving on a high-risk bet. You protect what you have built. Except Jerome was not protecting what he had built. He was funding the identity that his portfolio had never been designed to create. His portfolio was a monument to caution. His destination identity required a completely different relationship to capital, one where money was a tool to deploy, not a score to protect. The liquidation was not reckless. It was a deliberate act of identity correction. Jerome's business returned the investment inside 14 months and kept growing. But here is what no one talks about. Even if it had taken 3 years or 5 years or even failed entirely, the decision would still have been correct within the framework of his destination identity. The alternative was spending another decade carefully protecting a number that would never fund the life he was trying to build. That is not a comfortable thought. It is supposed to be uncomfortable. Comfort is a feature of the old identity, not the new one. Sit with that for a moment. What portfolio, what savings, what careful accumulation are you currently protecting that might actually be a monument to staying where you are? The third example is the one that genuinely confuses people the most. It looks like failure from every angle. A company in its 5th year of operation, profitable, growing at a reliable rate, decides to decline a contract worth $400,000, not defer it, not renegotiate it, decline it entirely. From the outside, from the forward planning position, this is incomprehensible. Companies need revenue. Revenue funds growth. Saying no to $400,000 when you are a small operation is not strategic. It looks like self-sabotage. The founder of that company, a woman named Dana, turned down the contract because accepting it would have required her to staff up in a direction that contradicted where she was building toward. The contract would have demanded operational infrastructure that belonged to a different kind of company than the one she was creating. Taking the money would have grown her current identity at the expense of her destination identity. It would have been the equivalent of spending $400,000 to nail her feet to the wrong floor. Dana's company, freed from that wrong direction expansion, reached the milestone she had been targeting inside 18 months. The contract she declined would have likely delayed that by 3 years. This is where the principle crystallizes. It is worth saying slowly so every word lands. Wealthy decisions look wrong from the wrong identity. That is the answer to the question you have been holding since the first paragraph. When you watch someone raise prices recklessly, or liquidate a safe portfolio for a risky venture, or turn down serious revenue, and it looks like arrogance or irrationality or poor judgment, what you are actually experiencing is a translation error. You are reading a decision written in the language of a destination identity you have not yet claimed. You are trying to decode it using the vocabulary of your current position. Of course, it does not make sense. You are using the wrong dictionary. This is what reverse gravity actually means in practice. It is not just a conceptual flip. It is the daily, specific, operational experience of making choices from a place you have not yet physically arrived at. When 𝗓𝗓 raised her prices, she was not calculating whether the market would support it. She was removing an element that did not belong to the identity she had already committed to. When Jerome liquidated his portfolio, he was not gambling. He was correcting the capital allocation of someone who had already decided what kind of operator he would be. When Dana declined $400,000, she was not leaving money on the table. She was declining to purchase a version of herself she had no interest in becoming. The identity bridge is not a metaphor. It is a decision-making address. It is the place you are already operating from when you make a move that looks insane to everyone watching and obvious to you. Every single time you have heard someone who built real wealth say, "I knew it was right even though I couldn't explain it," they were not describing intuition. They were describing the internal consistency of someone who had fully inhabited a destination identity and was making decisions from inside it. As this book keeps moving, we turn toward an argument about risk that cuts across the standard story. Once you grasp that turn, it reshapes every calculation you make about what is safe and what is dangerous. For now, bring it back to you, not abstractly. Think about a decision you have been circling, something you have been calling risky or premature or not yet the right time. Ask yourself a precise question. Risky from which identity? Premature according to whose timeline? Not yet the right time by what standard? Because if the answer to any of those questions is your current identity, your current timeline, your current standard, then what you are calling caution might actually be allegiance to a position you have already decided you want to leave. The person who has already arrived does not protect the old address. And the decision in front of you, you already know which identity it belongs to. Chapter 10. Simon's plan was missing one step at the start. Something is draining from you right now, and it has no sound. Not money exactly, though money is part of it. What is draining is possibility. Every week you spend building a plan from where you are rather than from where you intend to arrive. The gap between those two places quietly widens. Not because you are moving backward, because the destination is moving forward faster than your plan can reach it. You are not falling behind through laziness or lack of effort. You are falling behind because of one missing step. A step that most people never even know exists. And the cost of that missing step does not show up this month. It shows up 3 years from now when you are still capable, still working, still trying, and still somehow not there. That is the real loss, not the money you do not have today. The version of your life you do not arrive at ever because your plan was built on the wrong foundation from the very first line. That missing step is what this chapter is about. Let's go back to 𝗜𝗠𝗣𝗧. You met her earlier in this book. 𝗜𝗠𝗣𝗧 was 31, working in logistics coordination for a mid-sized distribution company, and she had built what she described as a solid plan, a 5-year plan. She had mapped out promotions, certifications, side income streams, a savings target, and a rough investment threshold. The plan was coherent. It was realistic. Most people who saw it would have called it smart. And she followed it with genuine discipline for 14 months. Then she stopped. Not because she gave up. Because something in the plan kept refusing to move. She was doing the work, and the numbers were not responding the way the plan said they should. She told a colleague that it felt like walking up a hill that kept getting steeper the further she climbed, even though nothing in her external circumstances had changed. Here is the question that is going to stay open for a while. Why does a solid, disciplined, realistic plan sometimes produce that feeling, the hill getting steeper despite real effort? Hold that question. The answer is not what you think it is. 𝗜𝗠𝗣𝗧's plan had 5 stages. Stage 1 was to earn a project management certification within 6 months and use it to qualify for a senior coordinator role. Stage 2 was to reach a salary of $78,000. Stage 3 was to build a 6-month emergency reserve. Stage 4 was to begin investing 15% of her income. Stage 5 was to explore launching a consulting arm by year 4, assuming the previous stages were complete. Look at the structure of that plan. Every stage depends on the stage before it. Every action is a product of the current position. 𝗜𝗠𝗣𝗧 at 31, with her current salary and current title, is the starting point. The plan moves forward from there like a chain of dominoes. You knock the first one down and the rest follow. This is linear causality thinking. It is so deeply wired into how most of us were taught to plan that it feels like common sense. Of course you start where you are. Where else would you start? But here is where the plan broke. Bring to mind your actual circumstances from 3 years back. Not the polished version, the honest one you were living in. The decisions you made then, the opportunities you took or didn't take, the things you spent money on, the things you said yes to, how many of those decisions were made by the person you are today? Almost none of them. They were made by who you were then, with the information you had then, from the position you occupied then. Your past self made a plan for your present self, and your present self had to live inside it. Now ask yourself honestly, did that plan leave room for who you actually became? This is the cost 𝗜𝗠𝗣𝗧 was paying. Her plan was written by 𝗜𝗠𝗣𝗧 at 31 in her current position, but the plan was supposed to produce a 𝗜𝗠𝗣𝗧 who ran a consulting operation and invested with intention. Those are 2 entirely different people, and the plan never asked the second one a single question. Here is what backward engineering demands, and why it is the only structure that actually works at scale. The plan does not start with who you are. It starts with who you will be when you arrive, not as a motivational exercise, not as visualization, as a design question, a specific operational design question. Who is the person standing at the destination of this plan, and how does that person think about money, time, contracts, clients, and risk? What does that person say no to? What does that person do first on a Tuesday morning? What is already obvious to that person that is not yet obvious to you? Those are not soft questions. They are the load-bearing structure of the entire plan. A woman named 𝗡𝗢𝗧𝗘 found this out by accident. She was 28, freelancing in content strategy, and she had set a target of reaching $10,000 a month in client revenue within 2 years. She had a forward plan. Outreach numbers, proposal templates, a pricing ladder starting at $1,200 per project and stepping up from there. She was 8 months in and had reached $4,000 a month. Real progress. Then she attended a workshop where a facilitator asked one question that stopped her completely. What does the version of you earning $10,000 a month do differently on the first day of a new client relationship? 𝗡𝗢𝗧𝗘 sat with that question for 2 days. What she realized was devastating in its simplicity. The $10,000 a month version of her did not chase clients. She attracted them. She did not start with pricing and work up to value. She started with positioning and let pricing follow. She did not write proposals that justified her rate. She wrote proposals that assumed the client already understood her value and were simply working out the mechanics of starting. Every single element of 𝗡𝗢𝗧𝗘's forward plan had been optimized for the wrong identity. She had been building habits, scripts, and systems for a $4,000 a month freelancer working toward more, rather than for a $10,000 a month operator who had already arrived. She rewrote the plan in one afternoon. Same destination, radically different path. That is the identity bridge, and it is what was missing from 𝗜𝗠𝗡's plan. Now let's reconstruct 𝗜𝗠𝗡's plan from the arrival point backward. Start with the arrived version of 𝗜𝗠𝗡. She runs a logistics consulting practice. She has 3 to 4 retained clients at any given time. She earns between $8,000 and $12,000 a month in consulting fees. She works from a structured schedule she controls. She invests automatically and does not think about it month to month because the system does the thinking. That's 𝗜𝗠𝗡, the one who has arrived. Who is she? She is someone who speaks to clients as an equal. She is someone whose pricing reflects scarcity, not availability. She is someone who built her consulting framework before she had a single client, because the arrived 𝗜𝗠𝗡 knows that a credible framework is what makes the first client possible, not the other way around. She is someone who got comfortable with being known publicly in her industry before the revenue existed to justify it, because visibility is not a reward for success. It is a precondition for it. Now run that backward. What is the last thing the arrived 𝗜𝗠𝗡 did before reaching the destination? She signed her 3rd retained client after being recommended by the 2nd. So the 2nd client relationship had to be exceptional, not just in delivery, but in the way she structured the engagement from the start. What had to be true before that 2nd client relationship? She had a documented consulting process. Not improvised, written, refined, and tested, which means she tested it with the first client, which means when she approached the first client she already had a process to offer, not just a skill. What had to be true before the first client? She had positioned herself publicly. An article, a workshop, a specific point of view in her industry with her name on it. What had to be true before the public positioning? She had articulated her framework clearly enough to teach it. That required her to sit down and think about her expertise as a system, not just as experience. And what had to be true before all of that? She had to decide she was a consultant before she had any consulting income. That is the missing step. That is the one step at the start that 𝗜𝗠𝗣's original plan never included. She had planned to become a consultant after achieving financial stability. The backward plan reveals that she needed to claim the identity of a consultant before drawing any other line. Because every decision that follows, what she invests in, who she talks to, what she says yes to, what she walks away from, changes completely depending on which identity she is operating from. The forward plan made her a better logistics coordinator who was eventually trying to exit. The backward plan would have made her a consultant who was using her coordinator role as field research. Same daily life, entirely different relationship to it. Now close the loop on the hill that kept getting steeper for 𝗜𝗠𝗣. The hill gets steeper under a forward plan because as you move toward a destination, the gap between your current identity and the required identity grows more visible, not less. You can feel the mismatch. You work harder to compensate for it, but effort is not the solution to an identity gap. The only solution is to cross the identity bridge first, before the plan begins, and let the plan flow from that position rather than toward it. This is reverse gravity. A forward plan pulls you uphill, toward something you have not yet claimed. A backward plan puts you at the top and lets the structure of the destination pull every decision into alignment, as though you are already standing in the place you are trying to reach. You already know which decision belongs to which identity. The question the next chapter will answer is the one most people never ask out loud. When you build a plan from the arrived identity, how do you make the first concrete move without the resources that the arrived version of you already has? Chapter 11. Living backward is not delusion, it is precision. The first move is not the first thing you do. It is the last thing you decide. That sounds like a riddle invented to sound clever, and you would be right to push back. But stay with it for a moment. What you are about to hear is not philosophy. It is a description of how the people who actually got somewhere were already operating, usually without knowing they had a name for it. The question from the last chapter was real. How do you make the first concrete move without the resources that the arrived version of you already has? That question assumes the resources come first. This chapter is about why that assumption is the only thing actually standing between you and the life you keep sketching in your head at 2 in the morning. Here is what most people call delusional. You decide who you are before the evidence arrives. You make choices from an identity your bank account has not yet confirmed. You carry yourself through a room as though you already belong in it, even when your circumstances suggest otherwise. The conventional wisdom says that is dangerous, possibly arrogant, and almost certainly a setup for disappointment. The conventional wisdom is wrong, not in a vague, motivational poster kind of wrong. Wrong in the specific, measurable, documented way that behavioral economists have been pointing at for decades, while most people kept standing in line waiting for permission to begin. There is a question buried in this chapter, and it is worth naming now. Not answering yet, just naming. The question is this. What is the actual difference between someone who acts from a future identity and someone who is simply lying to themselves? You need a clean, precise answer to that question. Because at some point, someone in your life is going to raise an eyebrow and call what you are doing wishful thinking. You need language sharp enough to cut through that. Hold the question. The answer is coming. Go back to your actual circumstances from 3 years back. Not the dramatic version. Not the version you would tell at a dinner party. The quiet version, where you knew something was off but could not name it yet. The version where you were doing everything you were told was correct, putting in the hours, being responsible, staying realistic, and somehow still feeling like you were running on a treadmill someone else designed. That version of you was living forward, taking what was present and trying to add to it day after day, hoping the accumulation would eventually become something worth having. The question is not whether you were working hard enough. You probably were. The question is whether you were building from the right end. There is a researcher named 𝗓𝗠𝗣𝗥𝗧𝗔𝗡 who spent decades studying why certain students outperformed expectations, while others with identical starting conditions did not. Her findings became famous for reasons that had nothing to do with the most interesting part of her data. Everyone talks about fixed mindset versus growth mindset. Far fewer people talk about what she found underneath that. The students who outperformed did not simply believe they could improve. They had already assigned themselves a future identity, and they were making decisions from inside that identity in the present tense. They were not hoping to become. They were operating as though they already were, while gathering evidence to support the claim. That is not self-deception. That is self-concept consistency in action. Self-concept consistency is the principle that human beings are neurologically compelled to behave in ways that match their internal story about who they are. It is not inspiration. It is wiring. Your brain will work to close any gap between your current actions and your internal identity. It will do so automatically, relentlessly, and without your conscious direction. The only variable is which identity you hand it to start from. Here is where most people make the error. They hand the brain their current circumstances and tell it to extrapolate forward. So the brain starts from broke and tries to build toward wealthy. It starts from unknown and tries to build toward recognized. It starts from behind and tries to run toward ahead. And it moves slowly, because every step is a negotiation with the evidence of what is already real. The arrived version of you starts from a different coordinate. It works the same mechanism in the opposite direction. Give your brain the destination identity, not as a wish, not as a vision board, but as an operating premise, and it begins closing the gap from that end. It starts asking different questions. Not what can I afford, but what would someone with this trajectory choose here? Not what do I have access to, but what access does someone at that position typically build first? The behavior changes. Changed behavior produces changed results. Changed results confirm the identity. The loop runs in your favor instead of against you. That is reverse gravity. You are no longer climbing up toward something. The destination is pulling you toward it, because you have accepted it as real in the only place that governs your actions, inside your own self-concept. Now let me tell you about a woman named Renata. Renata grew up in a city in the industrial Midwest, in a family where money conversations happened in lowered voices, and the conclusion was always the same. There is not enough. She was 26 when she decided she was going to build a real estate portfolio, not as a goal she was working toward, as something that was already true about her in some future tense she intended to drag into the present. She told her sister. Her sister said, and these are the exact words, "That is not who we are." Renata did not have capital. She did not have credit history worth talking about. What she did have was a decision. She began attending the same informational meetings that property investors in her city attended, not because she had money to deploy, but because that was where the person she had already decided to be would naturally spend a Tuesday evening. She asked questions as though she were managing a portfolio that did not yet exist. She made connections on the premise of being someone whose next deal was simply not closed yet. She read the contracts. She learned the language. She built relationships with people who were already where she intended to be. None of that required capital. All of it required identity. 14 months after that Tuesday evening, Renata closed her first duplex, not because the money appeared from nowhere. Because the identity she had been operating from had quietly built the knowledge, the network, and the credibility that eventually made access to that capital inevitable. She did not pretend the duplex existed before it did. She made the decisions that the person who owned it would have been making all along. That is the distinction. That is the line between living from arrived identity and lying to yourself. When someone is lying to themselves, they are using a fantasy to avoid the present. They are saying they are rich so they do not have to look at their bank account. They are claiming a destination to escape the discomfort of motion. The fantasy is a substitute for action. When someone is operating from arrived identity, they are using the destination as a decision filter in the present. Every choice gets run through one question. Would the version of me who is already there make this decision? They are not avoiding the present. They are applying a different standard to it. The discomfort of present reality does not disappear. It becomes the material they are working with, not the verdict about what is possible. One is a sedative. The other is a compass. This is the part most people miss when they accuse this approach of being delusional. Delusional thinking uncouples behavior from reality. Identity-forward thinking connects behavior to a chosen reality with greater precision than conventional planning does. Because conventional planning starts from where you are and tries to solve for where you want to be, which means every assumption in the plan is contaminated by present limitations. Here is what the research on high achievers consistently shows. The people who closed the largest gaps between their starting conditions and their eventual positions were not better at planning from the present. They were better at deciding who they already were before the present had any reason to agree. There is a word for building the bridge from the arrived end. That word is precision, not delusion, not magical thinking. Precision, the act of choosing your decision coordinates deliberately, because you understand that the coordinates determine the outcomes, and the outcomes are what you are responsible for constructing. The identity bridge is not a metaphor for feeling good about yourself. It is the structural mechanism by which your future self sends instructions back through the only medium available, your daily choices, to the person you are right now. The arrived version of you cannot write you a letter. It can only be simulated accurately enough that your behavior in the present starts to match what that version would have done all along. And here is what was promised at the start of this chapter. The question, what separates acting from a future identity and simply lying to yourself? The answer is behavior. Specifically, whether that identity produces decisions that, accumulated over time, make the destination more structurally real, or whether it is a story that produces no decisions at all. Renata made decisions. She went to Tuesday meetings. She asked questions. She built the network before the deal. The destination identity was not a comfort. It was a compass, pointing her behavior towards specific, concrete actions that someone at her destination would naturally have taken. That is the only test, not whether the identity feels true right now, not whether your circumstances confirm it, whether operating from it produces the next right move. In a later section, we turn toward an argument about momentum, specifically about how fast it can compound once the identity bridge is fully built that cuts across the standard story. When that point settles, it reshapes how quickly you move. But right now, the 5-year plan has been established. The arrived identity is a working premise. The identity bridge is structural, not decorative. The first move is not the first thing you do. It is the last thing you decide. The only question left is who decides it. Chapter 12. The millions are already looking for the right person. Every civilization that has ever risen left behind the same quiet mystery. Across centuries, across continents, across languages that have no words in common, a small number of people in every generation accumulated wealth that seemed to arrive rather than be chased. They were not always the ones who worked hardest. They were not always the ones who started with the most. But they shared something the people around them could not quite name. A particular quality of being settled. A particular sense of already having arrived somewhere before they were seen to move. This pattern is older than any financial system, older than any market, older than money itself, and it is still operating right now today in your lifetime. The real question is not whether the pattern is real. The question is whether you have positioned yourself inside it. That is exactly what this chapter will answer. You decide it. The last chapter handed you a question and did not settle it. The weight of that sentence deserves a moment. Deciding does not mean declaring, it means becoming. Here is something most people never consider. Wealth does not sit still waiting to be found. Wealth moves. It flows through systems, through decisions, through hands and accounts and deals and ideas. And like any current, it does not move randomly. It moves toward coherence. It moves toward people who are already arranged inside, already ordered in a way that matches the frequency at which large resources need to operate. You are not hunting wealth. Wealth is conducting a search of its own. Remember your actual circumstances from 3 years back. Not geographically. Inside, were you the same person? Did you believe the same things about what was possible for you? Did you carry the same ideas about what you deserved, what you were capable of, what kind of life was realistic? If you are honest, there is a gap. Something has changed. And that gap, that distance between the person you were and the person you are right now, is not just growth. It is movement toward coherence. Every time your identity becomes more aligned with the person who can hold significant wealth without flinching, you become easier for wealth to locate. This is the open door most people walk past. They spend years trying to earn their way to a wealthy life. They add income streams. They cut expenses. They optimize and calculate. None of that is worthless. But none of it is the primary mechanism. The primary mechanism is identity coherence, the degree to which your inner operating system matches the requirements of the destination you intend to occupy. Consider a man named Marcus. He ran a mid-sized printing business in a city that was changing around him. For 11 years he chased contracts, pitched clients, hired staff, lost staff, survived downturns. He was disciplined. He was strategic. By any reasonable measure, he was doing everything right, but he always felt like he was running towards something that kept moving. At year 12, something changed, not in his business, in how he thought of himself. He stopped introducing himself as a printer who hoped to expand. He started operating as a business owner whose next chapter was already decided. He made a decision about a $200,000 piece of equipment before he had the capital secured, not out of recklessness, because the person he had decided to be would not hesitate over a decision that was already aligned. The capital arrived from a source he had never approached before. Within 18 months, his revenue had tripled. He did not chase that outcome. The outcome found the person he had already become. The lesson in Marcus's story does not live in the equipment or the revenue number. Let that settle before you reach for an explanation. What shifted was his gravitational field. That is the metaphor this entire book has been building toward. Reverse gravity. When you are living from your future identity backward, you stop generating effort that reaches forward and you start generating a pull that draws things toward you. Not magically, not without work, but the work stops being the mechanism and starts being the expression. There is a profound difference between those two things. You have been taught your whole life that effort causes results, that more effort causes more results, that if the results are not arriving, the answer is more effort. This is linear causality thinking, and it is the slowest possible path to anywhere significant. The faster path runs in the opposite direction. You start at arrival. You decide the identity of the person who already lives in the outcome you want. Then you let that identity make your daily decisions for you. Every decision a wealthy person makes is not a smart calculation. It is an expression of who they believe themselves to be. They say yes to certain rooms because people like them are in those rooms. They say no to certain opportunities because people like them do not spend their time that way. The decisions are not separate actions. They are identity maintenance, the ongoing behavior of a person who is already located at the destination. You are that person right now. Not as a belief you have to manufacture. As a recognition you have been circling for the entire length of this book. Every chapter you have absorbed has been installing a different operating assumption, replacing the linear forward planning instinct with a reverse-engineered identity construct. And here in Chapter 12, you are close enough to the end of this process to feel something shift. The millions are not waiting for you to earn them. They are moving through the world searching for the right container. A person whose beliefs are consistent with receiving and holding and deploying large resources. A person whose self-concept does not collapse under the weight of real opportunity. A person who, when a door opens, does not look around the room to find the person the door was meant for. That person is you. The search is over. This is the arrival this book has been engineering, not delivering, engineering. You do not arrive by reading a sentence. You arrive by recognizing that you have already made the internal arrangements that allow arrival to happen. The 5-year plan, the 10-year plan, the careful sequential stacking of one step on top of another. Those are the tools of someone who has not yet claimed the destination as home. That is not a criticism. It is simply a description of a longer road. You are not on that road anymore. The identity bridge is not something you build over time. It is something you step onto the moment you decide with full weight and no reservations that the destination is where you live. From that moment forward, the bridge is not a bridge at all. It is simply the ground under your feet. Wealth does not reward the most persistent seekers. It settles into the most coherent containers, and coherence is not complicated. It is the state of being the same person in every room, at every income level, under every pressure. Consistent, settled, already arrived. Before long, we turn toward an argument about the cost of success that cuts across the standard story. After that really registers, it reshapes what you are willing to give up in order to move forward. For now, hold this. The search that wealth has been conducting through the noise of the world has a name. It is your name. Chapter 13. Tear up the old map, you live there now. You have been planning to arrive somewhere you could simply choose to inhabit right now. Sit with that for a moment. Not the logistics of it, not the objections already forming in the back of your mind. Just that one quiet, slightly uncomfortable observation. You have been drawing a road to a place you have not yet decided to call home. The plan has been careful. The steps have made sense. And every morning you wake up still standing at the beginning of the map, looking at the distance between here and there, feeling that distance as a fact about your life instead of a choice you keep making. That is not a failure of execution. It is something more specific. It is a failure of residency. You have been a tourist in the vision of who you are becoming. Visiting on weekends, staying just long enough to feel inspired, then coming back to where you live. This chapter is about moving in, not eventually. Now, there is a question that was planted 12 chapters ago and you may not have consciously noticed it. It was this: if wealth is already searching for its rightful owner, what does it mean to make yourself findable? That question has been sitting in the architecture of everything you have read since. The answer arrives here. 𝗓𝗠𝗡 had a 5-year plan. It was meticulous. She had the kind of plan that made other people feel both impressed and slightly inadequate when she described it at dinner. Year 1 was skill building. Year 2 was network expansion. Year 3, she would launch. Years 4 and 5 were reserved for scaling what she had built. She carried this plan in a navy blue notebook, updated it quarterly, and measured herself against it the way a student checks a syllabus. She was not behind. She was actually ahead of schedule on several metrics, but something was wrong. She felt the wrongness even when the numbers were right. One morning she sat down at her kitchen table with the notebook open in front of her and asked herself a question she had not thought to ask before. She asked, "Who is the person at the end of year 5? She wrote down every quality: decisive, financially sovereign, someone who does not ask permission, someone who makes decisions from strength rather than from the hope that the outcome will be good enough. She wrote until the description was detailed and alive. Then she looked up from the notebook and asked a second question. She asked, "What is stopping me from being that person today?" The silence that followed was not comfortable. She did not need year 1 through 4 to become decisive. She was already capable of decisive. She did not need 3 more years of network expansion to make decisions from strength. Strength was not something the timeline would deliver to her. It was something she was withholding from herself until she felt she had earned it. The plan was not a map to a destination. The plan was a holding room. She tore it out of the notebook slowly, deliberately, not in frustration. In the way you close a chapter of a book you have finally finished. She did not tear it up because she had failed. She tore it up because she had arrived. Look back at the version of you waking up each morning from 3 years back. Not in terms of income or job title or the size of your apartment, though those things matter. Think about how you made decisions. Think about what kind of person you believed you were allowed to be. Think about the version of you that existed then and the version sitting with this book right now. Notice that the distance between those 2 versions was not crossed by a plan. It was crossed by a series of quiet internal decisions about who you were willing to be. The plan did not cross that distance. You did. This is what reverse gravity looks like at its most personal. Every system in this book, every principle, every story about someone choosing the destination identity before the destination arrived, it was all pointing here, to this chapter, to this specific question you are now ready to hold without flinching. The question is not where do you want to go. The question is who are you when you have already gone there, and what is preventing you from living as that person inside of today. Linear causality thinking tells you there is a sequence to be respected. It tells you that identity follows achievement, that you earn the right to see yourself a certain way only after the external evidence arrives. This is the most seductive lie in the entire architecture of conventional financial advice because it feels responsible. It feels like the mature position. You would not want to get ahead of yourself. You would not want to be delusional. And that caution, reasonable as it sounds, is the mechanism by which you keep rebuilding the same road to a destination you never move into. The destination identity is not a fantasy. It is a set of specific behaviors, specific decisions, specific ways of responding to the same pressures you face today. The person you are planning to become eventually, that person does not wait for certainty before moving. That person does not catastrophize over a setback the way the current version of you might. That person knows how to hold discomfort without being dismantled by it. None of those things require a bank account. They require a decision. Here is what the identity bridge actually is, stripped of every metaphor. It is the practice of asking before any significant choice, what would the arrived version of me do here, and then doing that. Not performing it, not pretending toward it, actually doing it, even when it feels premature, even when the external evidence does not yet support the internal claim. You start at arrival. You make decisions from that place. And over time, the external world reorganizes itself around an identity it did not create, an identity you declared. Wealth, at its core, is the accumulation of aligned decisions made from a clear identity over time. Remove the clarity of identity and the decisions scatter. Restore it, and the accumulation becomes almost structural. This is not mysticism. It is not a law of attraction. It is a practical observation about how human beings direct attention, effort, and resource when they are operating from a settled sense of who they are. Now do this. Not tomorrow. Right now as you listen. Name the person you have been planning to become. Name them precisely. Not their income, their qualities. How they hold a difficult conversation. What they refuse to compromise on. How they begin a morning. What they no longer spend energy explaining to people who will not understand. Get that person into sharp focus. That is your destination identity. That is the address you have been drawing a road toward. Now tear up the map, not because the road was wrong, not because the plan was foolish. Tear it up because you do not need directions to a place you have just chosen to live. The map becomes irrelevant the moment the destination becomes home. You do not carry a map through rooms you already live in. You simply move through them, making the choices that people who live there make, and the evidence of your residency accumulates behind you rather than waiting somewhere ahead. Simone did not tear up her 5-year plan and become reckless. She tore it up and became precise in a way the plan had never allowed her to be, because the plan had always been conditional. Its implicit promise was that she would become herself when the conditions were met. She had finally decided she was not willing to wait for conditions. You have been building a road. The road has cost you years of permission you never gave yourself. The person you are becoming is not a future tenant in a future life. That person is the rightful occupant of the one you already have. The forward plan was always a map to a place you could simply choose to be. So who do you choose to be in the first minute after this chapter ends? Chapter 14. Think backwards once and never think forward again. Every civilization that has ever risen and faded left behind a small group of people who did not think the way their neighbors thought. They were not prophets. They were not supernatural. But they held a single mental orientation that separated them from the crowd in ways the crowd could never quite name. They started from the end. They did not build toward a destination. They lived from it. That pattern has been discovered and forgotten and discovered again across every culture that ever asked why certain people move through life as though they already know how it turns out. You have spent this entire book learning the mechanics of that pattern. And right now, in this final chapter, you are not learning something new. You are crossing a line you cannot uncross. That earlier question is still echoing. Who do you choose to be in the first minute after this chapter ends? Hold that question. The answer to it is also the answer to everything this book has been building toward. You will have it before these final pages are through. There is something that happens when a person finishes a book like this one. A specific and very human temptation rises up. The temptation is to take everything you have absorbed and organize it into a plan. A nice, ordered, sequential plan with steps and timelines and boxes to check. Year 1, do this. Year 2, achieve that. Year 5, arrive. You recognize this temptation because you have lived it before. That 5-year plan from the very first chapter of this book felt so reasonable and responsible when you made it. It was exactly that. A road built from where you stood toward a destination you had not yet claimed as home. You were constructing the path before you had decided who would walk it. That is the final cost of forward thinking. And it is a cost most people pay their entire lives without ever knowing what it is they are buying. Return to the version of you waking up each morning from 3 years back. Not where you hoped to be, not where you planned to be. Where you actually were. What you believed about yourself. What decisions you made because of those beliefs. What you said no to because the version of you that existed then could not yet see the permission slip. Now think about the version of you that would have existed if you had already installed the identity of arrival. The decisions would have looked different. The no's would have come from a different place. The yesies would have come faster. You cannot go back and give that to yourself, but you are standing at the exact point in time where the next 3 years get decided. And the person deciding them is whoever you choose to be in this moment. This is the mirror, not a question to answer out loud. Just a place to sit for one breath and feel the weight of it. The mechanic of this entire book has been reverse gravity. The idea that the future, when made real enough in your identity, pulls you toward it instead of requiring you to push toward it from behind. Forward planning requires constant push. It requires willpower and discipline and motivation. You are always moving away from the familiar and toward the unfamiliar. Reverse identity thinking flips the direction of effort. The destination becomes familiar first. The version of you who has already arrived becomes the operating system. And decisions flow not from effort but from identity. Here is what you now know that you cannot unknow. Forward planning feels like driving a car by watching only the road you have already passed. It orients you in the wrong direction. Every plan built from your current position calculates what is possible based on what you already have, what you already know, and who you already are. It is a plan built by someone who has not yet arrived. Of course it undershoots. Of course it takes too long. Of course it requires you to become someone new at every stage. And that becoming is painful and uncertain because you are improvising it under pressure rather than inhabiting it by design. Once you see this, forward planning loses its authority. Not its usefulness entirely, but its authority. You can still use timelines and milestones and practical steps, but they stop being the engine. They become the wheels. The engine is identity. The engine is who you are when you wake up, before you have checked a single notification or responded to a single demand on your time. The engine is the decision you make in the first minute of the day about which version of yourself is going to be present for the rest of it. Let me tell you about a woman named Celeste. She was 31 years old, working a salary that paid the bills and left very little room beyond them. She had read dozens of books on wealth and productivity. Every one of them had given her a system, a process, a forward-facing plan. She followed them dutifully and moved forward the way a person moves through deep water, slowly, with great effort, always aware of how far there was still to go. One afternoon she wrote a single sentence on a note card and taped it to the inside of her kitchen cabinet. It said, "I am already the person who builds things that last. Not I want to be. Not I am working toward being. Just, I am. She read it every morning not as a wish but as a fact she was choosing to inhabit before her logical mind could argue otherwise. 6 months later she had started a small consulting arrangement on the side, something she would have talked herself out of before. Not because the note card made money appear, but because the note card changed whose eyes she was making decisions through. 2 years after that, the consulting income had replaced her salary. She did not follow a plan. She followed an identity. The note card did not give her a roadmap. It gave her a home base, somewhere to return to when the noise of ordinary life tried to convince her she was smaller than the sentence said she was. That is what the identity bridge is. It is not affirmation. It is not positive thinking. It is a structural decision about who is operating your decisions. It is the choice to start at arrival rather than plan toward it. Start at arrival. Say it again because it is the phrase this entire book was built to deliver. Start at arrival. Not work toward arrival. Not hope for arrival. Start there. Make every choice, every conversation, every morning decision from the vantage point of someone who has already stepped through the door. That person is not reckless. That person is not delusional. That person simply has a clearer picture of what matters and what does not, because they have already answered the question of who they are. The open loop from the beginning of this chapter closes here. Who do you choose to be in the first minute after this chapter ends? The answer is not a feeling. It is not a mood or a burst of motivation. It is a declaration, made quietly and firmly inside your own chest, made to no one but yourself, about which identity you are operating from starting now. The person who is still planning toward arrival, or the person who has already claimed it and is simply filling in the days between now and the moment the world catches up to what you already know about yourself. You cannot unlearn the direction of reverse gravity. You cannot unsee that forward planning builds roads to destinations not yet owned. The 5-year plan, the 10-year plan, the someday plan, they are not wrong because they are ambitious. They are limiting because they are built by someone who has not yet stepped into the identity of the person who achieves them. Now you know the order of operations. Identity first. Plans second. Arrival is not the end of the road. Arrival is where you start.